Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Seeing as there is a lot of news and information to get to, folks, I'm going to go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist. And as I do so, go ahead and make yourself comfortable, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into this pre-flight checklist and get us going. Well, in the wake of Sunday's dastardly attack at the Pulse Gay Nightclub in Orlando, Florida, the United States of America is reeling once again in the aftermath of an Islamo-fascist terrorist attack. And one of the things that we can take away from all of this is that the usual suspects and the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the Salivating Mainstream Media and the Fabian Socialists and all of those other groups that are seeking to divide and conquer the American people, they're trying to obfuscate the truth. They're trying to move away from what is really causing the dangers and the threats that are substantive and significant with respect to what's happening in the United States. And ever since the September 11th attacks from 2001, you would think that the entire dichotomy and structure and even the topic of the debate and the way that we would discuss these issues would have changed, would have shifted diametrically from what it had been in the past. But it hasn't, because the socialists are wanting to blame our fundamental and inalienable right to keep and bear firearms. They're wanting to say that this has something to do with Christian conservatives or the right to keep and bear firearms, always going after these red herrings. And they do that on purpose. It's because no matter what, as Kat Sunstein said, that they need to really just never allow a tragedy or crisis to go to waste. And so, in other words, they are just unwilling and seemingly unable, but it's more unwilling, to divorce themselves or separate themselves from their fundamentalist agenda. Of course, that does nothing to benefit the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. In fact, it's designed not to. It's designed to operate in such a fashion as to weaken and to distract the true popular sovereigns in this country. And that's part of the danger of factionalization that George Washington warned about in his farewell address. And we're not being all that serious about this. We're not considering it. And again, it's because of the way that the Fabian Socialists have infiltrated our institutions of education, and it's the way that they have also taken control of the salivating mainstream media, so that the narrative is one which is diametrically opposed to the truth. And a perfect case point and example of this is this whole notion that everybody thinks that Omar Mateen, the Islamic shooter who went into that nightclub and apparently was a regular there for over 3 years, he came forth and was using a particular firearm. Now, the media wants to paint it as an AR-15. Because that's something that they preconditioned the entire Western world to think of as a bad thing, a bad, scary weapon. But in fact, he was carrying a Sig Sauer MCX, which is neither here nor there. It just goes to show that they will try and inflame the narrative. They'll try and fan the flames to encourage a particular point of view. And it's really intellectually disingenuous, but it gets to the heart of the matter of what we've been saying here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, for quite some time now. That these people are not interested in our best interest, that they're not looking out to ensure that we come off protected and that our interests are assured. Rather, they are working towards this agenda to tear this nation apart at the seams and to replace it with a Fabian socialist dystopia. And as long as we're mindful of that, it becomes much easier to start to rebut them and to rebuff them. And of course, it's always the first state or first step to acknowledge that there is this problem, to stand up to this problem, and to then act accordingly as is necessary to stop these sorts of attacks. And the way that we can do that is to turn to the key which has been with us since the inception of our republic some 235 years ago. And that's the Constitution. The Constitution holds everything for us. It is that great social contract that is made between the ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, and the government. And therefore, through the Constitution, we know what the supreme law of the land is, because pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, what is commonly referred to as the Supremacy Clause, the United States Constitution itself constitutes the supreme law of the land. And therefore, anything that is, directly contradictory to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of that document is violative of the Constitution. Now, the Fabian socialists realize this, and they just don't care. It's seen to them that the Constitution is this antiquated, outdated document that really has no meaning or importance. And it comes down again to their twisted game of semantics. And why would they focus on semantics? Again, it's to change the narrative. They want to ensure that the entire country is forever changed, and in a negative way, to create a system that the United States was never meant to be. And that is a system that doesn't recognize the fundamental and inalienable rights of the individual popular sovereign. Now, I know that we've mentioned this on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, but it's something we can't ignore, because if we start to ignore it, if we turn our backs to it, it is going to give them the foothold they need to unravel everything within society. And that's the thing. They are relentless. They are tireless. They are incessant in their efforts to strip and deprive us of our fundamental and inalienable rights. And that's what it comes down to. They don't like the idea that the American people are free to think for themselves, are free to act for themselves, because that means that they can question their ideology and stand up to it and oppose it. And you see, it's why I've said before that the Fabian socialist dogma is basically one that cannot win in the marketplace of ideas. And the reason it can't is it's not based on logic or reason. It's based on an archaic idea. Remember, I've also stated that Alexis Tocqueville, that French philosopher who was just completely admirable of the fledgling United States at that time, said that those who espouse any form of socialism are actually New Age feudalists. And there really is no way to argue with that. Feudalism, it was based on a top-down centralized system in where the people were controlled from cradle to grave. In fact, the term villain, as I've mentioned before, actually referred to a landless peasant in a feudal system, actually more akin to a serf, meaning that you couldn't leave the land without the landlord's permission. And isn't it interesting that in our rental law, we still have that, landlord and tenant. And that's what it comes down to. They want us to all be tenants of the government, to necessarily rely on the government. The government would provide us permission for everything. And therefore, if the government says that radical Islam or Islam of any stripe is not behind the terrorist attacks, even though the great weight of the evidence shows, exactly the contrary, we're supposed to ignore that. We're supposed to just close our eyes to it because Big Brother is telling us what is right and what we are to think and how we are to react and feel. But of course, that is contradictory to the American heritage, spirit, character, and identity. And you see, this is where identity politics comes in. It's part of the twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism. It's all designed to pit American citizen against American citizen, and for the purpose of trying to ensure that they can tear us apart. It's easier to destroy us when we are divided. And we are divided the way we are right now because of these incessant efforts. They try and obfuscate the truth. They try and attack us for pointing out the truth, that it's not an inanimate object like firearms that caused the sorts of violence that we saw in the Orlando shooting. And then they try and say that Islam has nothing to do with it, even though he called 911, he being Omar Mateen, called 911 and basically expressed his devotion and his commitment to the leader of ISIS, the Islamic State, what I call the Islamo-fascist state, Abu al-Baghdadi. And then, of course, ISIS, in the immediate wake of these attacks, came out and claimed all the credit for it. But no, that doesn't matter. It's really Christianity and conservatives and the current political atmosphere in the United States that caused this. At least that's the narrative being peddled by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. And it's not real. It's not true at all. Because, again, it's part of a propagandistic narrative. They're trying to label. That's what they always do. And they do this because, again, that's how they can divide and conquer. That's how they can tear us apart. And then what they do is, when they distract us, they turn away from what they're really doing, which is attempting to drastically, fundamentally, and irreparably change the United States of America without the consent or input of the popular sovereigns. But what a lot of them try and say is, look, nobody really understands the Constitution anymore. It's too archaic in its language. It's too draconian in its approach. It's too limiting. It's divisive because the people who wrote it were divisive and hateful people. Again, this is propaganda. It has no basis in reality. It ignores the fact that our Constitution is based on the natural law tenets, and it just goes to show that they don't believe that there is anything greater than themselves. They want to worship at the altar of the almighty state, the government. And what that shows is that they are willing to say anything, whether it's true or not, if it advances their agenda. This is straight out of Joseph Goebbels' principles of propaganda. Repeat a lie enough, and it becomes the truth, so long as it's boomerang proof. I know that that's one of the things that my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, always likes to mention on our episodes, and it bears truth. What it means when we say boomerang proof is make sure that it can't come back and hit you. Well, that's the problem with the Fabian socialist left. They have, in the past, been able, through complete Iron Curtain-like control of the salivating mainstream media, been able to prevent their narrative from being thrown back into their face. But in this case, it's with the rise of the internet and this social media, we have been able to combat and counter it. And the way that we combat it is that we point to the truth. We look and examine it and see what's there for ourselves. And by engaging in that sort of research, which is now more easy, or, more easily accomplished than ever before, we are able to take it to the next step, which is to call them out on it. And it has to be done. Now, granted, they have responded by having basically sinking their claws into the body politic of the United States. They have managed to control the regulatory process and system. And as they further push the government and our society away from the Constitution, then they can engage in even greater amounts of social engineering and overzealous regulation. And when they overzealously regulate the private sector, that's when they can start to redefine the country and to ensure that the people are just so busy or caught up trying to sustain their standard and quality of living. And when you look at how they have been going about this, you see that they've essentially been trying to do this boiling frog thing. The old adage goes that if you throw a frog into a pot of boiling water, it's going to jump out. It's going to sense the danger to its life, the immediate threat of death, and it's going to hop out. However, if you have a frog that's in a pot at room temperature and slowly, in incremental fashion, ratchet up the temperature until that pot hits boiling, hits the boiling point, then the frog is not going to sense the danger. The frog is going to sit there until it's cooked. That's what they're doing, slowly ramping up the pressure until they reach a point where they think that the crisis can be utilized to their advantage, to their agenda, and then they are going to push down as hard and as fast as they can to incite a knee-jerk reaction out of the people and thereby cause changes that would never otherwise be allowed to happen. Now, the way that you would combat this is to have an opposition movement that is very willing to stand up to them and will not back down and is willing to engage them in their chicanery. But the reason that we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have changed the meaning of the acronym of GOP from Grand Old Party to Gutless Opposition Party is all throughout the tenure of these disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime. The Gutless Opposition Party has only been offering token resistance. Now, that's not to say that there aren't a few gems or diamonds in the rough. People like Ted Cruz and Mike Lee, Ben Sass, and various others who have just been at the forefront of fighting for our liberties. But they are the ones that are maligned by the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. They, along with their supporters, are painted as racist, homophobes, bigoted, sexist individuals. Again, it's all part of a false narrative. But with the rise of social media, we have seen an ability to combat that. But at the same time, we've seen negative elements from social media come in. Take, for instance, ISIS, the way that they have manipulated social media to their advantage. Look at the way that the presumptive gutless opposition party nominee Donald J. Trump has used social media to drive the political narrative and discourse and debate in this country into the gutter. So we're losing certain aspects of society because of a multifaceted problem. First and foremost, we have the infiltration of our education, of the media, and of the information media sources. But we also have a type of unchecked, unbalanced sort of decay in decorum because of moral relativism and political correctness. And we've already seen that political correctness has really ignited some major problems in the United States. We see that we're not calling our enemies out for who they are. We're not properly identifying them. We're not moving forward with the truth. Instead, we're running around in circles trying to blame the American citizenry for this. And they always try and say, look, you can't have Islamophobia. Well, here's the deal. Let's look at some of the most major attacks that have occurred in American history. The 1993 World Trade Center bombing, that was carried out by Muslims. The worst in American history being 9/11, that was carried out by Muslims. But before that, we had the embassies that were attacked in Africa. We had the USS Cole that was attacked. Then, after 9/11, San Bernardino, which was the most recent before the Orlando Nightclub shooting. But then there was Major Nidal Hasan, who was proclaiming his Islamic faith, by his own words, when he carried out that deadly shooting rampage. And then let's not forget at Chattanooga, Tennessee, at our military recruitment center, when another Islamo-fascist appeared and started killing people in the name of his religion. And of course, there was also this hostage situation in Amarillo, Texas, in my home state, where an Islamic employee of that Walmart took his manager hostage. He was a Somali, and he was screaming in Arabic. And now the narrative is Islam had nothing to do with that. It was just a misunderstanding or a miscommunication. No, it wasn't. There's no miscommunication about that. And if you look at all of these things I've mentioned, what is the one common denominator? What is that unchanging thread that's seen throughout it all? That unchanging thread is Islam itself. It has been involved in each and every one. And then look at how they want to deny the existence of Israel, how they call us the great Satan, how they fund terrorism, how they turn to this barbaric ideology. And for what? To change things, to create a global Islamic caliphate? Glenn Beck was absolutely right when he pointed this out, and he was one of the first to do so. He warned that a caliphate was going to emerge and that we would have to properly identify our foes. But because we have been so intoxicated by the twin doctrines, the kissing cousin doctrines of moral relativism and political correctness, the political powers that be, fearing the label of being either Islamophobic, racist, sexist, bigoted, they won't do anything. They're afraid to act. But we've got to get over that fear. We have got to start putting the interests of the popular sovereigns of this once thriving, flourishing, and dare I say, vibrant representative republic of ours first again. I know that's a marvel concept that a nation and its government should put the interests of its people first. But that's exactly what needs to be done. If we are ever going to put this country back onto the path of prosperity, it's got to be in such a way that we are promoting our interests, that we're standing up for our best needs, hopes, dreams, aspirations, obligations, desires. And that rests entirely also in the natural law tenets that form the bedrock foundation of not only the Constitution, but the Republic. And again, this is what the Fabian socialists loathe and despise. So, of course, they're going to go out and try and throw out these red herrings that have nothing to do with the incident at hand. They're going to stick their thumbs in their ears and attempt to ignore what's blatant, obvious, and right in front of our faces, because, again, what they're working towards is the redefinition of the United States, the fundamental transformation of the United States. And remember, Barack Hussein Obama stated in front of the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media when he was on the campaign trail in 2008 that we were 5 minutes away from fundamentally transforming the United States. Now, at the time, it may have seemed like an innocuous statement, but those who understand the Fabian Socialists, those who have delved into their history and their twisted machinations, know that they use these sorts of vague and ambiguous terms, and that they dabble in the dark and twisted art of semantics in order to basically lull the popular sovereigns into a false sense of security. Oh, they're not that bad. They're reasonable people. And look, they're for progress. That's why they're progressive. But just what sort of progress are we talking about here? The progress away from defending our interests, looking out for national security, ensuring that the American people are freely able to exercise their fundamental and inalienable rights that were endowed by their creator? No, that's not progress. What they're trying to do, they're trying to strip all of that from us. They're trying to deny us our rights. They want us to think that government gave us those rights. And again, it's how they even go into this claim that the Constitution is about negative rights and that it's about denying people. But no, it's negative only in the sense that it prevents government from being able to entrench upon or encroach upon our fundamental and inalienable rights. And why they do that, again, is it's about power and control for them. They want to control not only the narrative, but they want to control the daily facets of our lives. Well, enough is enough. We are at a crossroads in the history of this country. We can either continue to go down the path of these Fabian socialists who are diametrically opposed to all that we hold near and dear, or we can return to strict adherence to the fundamental tenets contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. And I think that the choice here is an open and obvious one. That the dangers that we face are clear and present, they are real, and we can't simply ignore them. And these Fabian socialists, they are just as dangerous as ISIS. Why? Because they sit there and they deny that ISIS is even a threat. And they try and obfuscate the truth, and they try and label people in a way that is wholly intellectually disingenuous. It's not about the truth. The truth to them is something to be shunned. It's almost like light, the sunlight to a vampire. And certainly that fits the Fabian socialist mold as they are pushing for a parasitic system. But make no mistake about it, folks, they want to be the masters of life and death, so they will find reasons to seek alliances with those who purport to have the mastery of life and death, who purport to be the ultimate deciders or decision makers with regard to that. And if we step back and recall that Alexis Tocqueville refers to any flavor of socialism as a new age form of feudalism, and recall that feudalism had its heyday in the medieval period, and that the barbaric ideas that are foisted upon the global theater by the Islamo-fascist state, they are both pushing for a medieval ideology. It's just that the Fabian socialists are a bit better at delivering their message because it's a less pointed message. It's one that's not religiously based. It's more strictly governmentally based. But they're both advocating for a type of collectivist mentality. And that can't be tolerated in the United States. It goes against everything that we stand for and represent. But that's the deal. That's what they have been working towards for the past 150 years. And the sooner that we realize this, the better off we'll be, because we'll be able to combat it, we'll be able to discover the truth, and we'll be able to stand up to them and say no. That's why it's so important that we foster a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of not only our shared Constitution, but also our fundamental and inalienable rights. And that's what we're dedicated to here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. Now, folks, one of the things that we've discussed ad nauseum here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, is this whole notion of a false narrative being peddled not only by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, but also by the Fabian socialists. And I want to take a step back in time, since this is a relatively important aspect that ties directly into this wave of Islamo-fascist terrorism that seems to be cropping up throughout the United States. And remember that towards the close of 2015, we saw the worst terrorist attack on American soil since the dark days of 9/11. The San Bernardino shooting eclipsed the Fort Hood shooting, and it also eclipsed the Chattanooga, Tennessee military recruitment center shooting. Of course, both of those are atrocious atrocities that occurred in our republic, but still, it was a sign that things were getting worse, that they were starting to feel more empowered, that they thought that under this weak and feckless leadership that they could get away with more, and that nothing would come down to hold them accountable, that no one would be held responsible. And accountability and responsibility is something that we really have not seen in any form or facet with respect to this disastrous Barack Hussein Obama regime. But we do know what the narrative is, and we do know the ones that they attempt to shift the blame to. And it's always constitutional conservatives or conservatives in general. And we see that not even a full month after the San Bernardino shooting happened, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, or would that be more apropos to refer to as the Department of Homeland Insecurity, J. Johnson came out and said basically that conservative right-wing fundamentalists pose an equivalent threat to national security as Islamofascism. Now, that should really take all of our breaths away, irrespective of what political slant anyone may have. Such a statement is not supported by reality. It's not supported by the facts. It's, again, part of that twisted game of semantics. But more importantly than that, it's part of the false narrative that is thrust upon us by these nefarious Fabian socialists. They don't deal with the truth. They don't care about the truth. As I mentioned in the previous segment, they care about their agenda come hell or high water, and they are going to double down on it to achieve it. And so for propagandistic reasons, Johnson came out and said, well, right-wing fundamentalists, they are a true threat. A true threat is what he said. And it really is frustrating when we see this sort of thing, because it shows that they don't want to admit the truth, that they are going to just double down on their narrative and their agenda come hell or high water, irrespective of what it will cause. And it's just shocking. This came out of the Daily Caller, and they basically said that 1 month after the San Bernardino terrorist attack, which left 14 innocent people dead, Johnson told advisors that right-wing extremists pose just as much of a threat to the country as Islamic extremists. Now, he had made this statement or these comments during a Homeland Security Advisory Council's January meeting. And, of course, this is funny because it brings in my home state, the city of Austin. And for those of you who don't know, I actually went to undergrad in Austin, not at UT, but at a little Catholic college in southern Austin known as St. Edward's. But it's so weird to step into Austin. In fact, that's one of the slogans of Austin, is to just keep Austin weird. It's got that hippie vibe. It's got that frothing at the mouth socialist vibe to it, that tinge to it, which is diametrically opposed to everything else that applies in Texas. It's I guess we could call it an island of socialism and in a sea of practical constitutional conservatism. And the state government, which is seated in Austin because it's the state capital, is also a stark, comparison to the city itself, which is just way, way out there. But anyway, back to the Daily Caller article, the Austin mayor, Art Acevedo, whom Johnson had appointed to this Security Advisory Council, had shifted the discussion to the threat of right-wing extremists, according to the official meeting minutes. Again, folks, this just goes to show how departed and from reality these people are, and just how depraved they are. They want to blame America first. That has always been the modus operandi of the frothing of the mouth Fabian socialists. They don't give a damn about facts or reality. They are about pushing this twisted narrative. And of course, they have a complacent, salivating mainstream media, a lapdog mainstream media that is just going to parrot everything that they're told from these so-called government officials. And it's quite clear that they're not standing up for the interests of the American people. They're supposed to be representing all American citizens, and that would include these so-called right-wing wackos. And again, who is making the determination of what constitutes wacko? Who is making the determination that they are as equal a threat as Islamofascism? When was the last time that a right-wing constitutionalist flew a plane into a building, killing 3,000 Americans? When was the last time that a constitutionalist ran around just engaging in horrific shootings, screaming Allahu Akbar? It ain't never happened, because it's not real. This is once again a red herring. It's designed to obfuscate the truth. It's insulting the intelligence of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, and it must come to a swift and immediate end. This is the sort of thing that we cannot tolerate. This sort of divisive, nonsensical behavior has no place in an open and honest society like that of the United States of America. Yet here we are, right here, right now, as I speak into the microphone, seeing that this is still the narrative of the Barack Hussein Obama regime. What? Is it workplace violence here too? Are they going to call the nightclub thing a workplace violence? I know that they've called the Amarillo incident with that Somali who took hostages and was eventually taken down by a SWAT team a workplace violence incident, which is wholly ironic and wholly unacceptable, because if you recall, one of the things that they did to deprive giving special payments to our service members and to allow them to receive medals and recognition for valor, courage, or whatever at Fort Hood, they called it workplace violence. This is just how depraved these people are. They are genuflexing to avoid properly identifying the real threats to the United States. And to do this sort of equivalency here is moral relativism at its worst. Because what he's doing, he's obfuscating the truth, he's turning away from the facts and reality, and he's trying to place emphasis and blame on something that is not anywhere near related to what was being discussed there. And the fact that this neo-communist Acevedo in Austin would shift the conversation to that just demonstrates again how detached Austin is from the rest of the state of Texas. It's why they're called freaks. Austin is full of freaks, and clearly the mayor of that city, which happens to be one of the fastest growing in all of the United States, is King Wacko. He's the King Whack job. One flew over the cuckoo's nest, and the cuckoo's nest is located in Austin. Clearly. Why else would he change the topic to that? I think this needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed, and there needs to be a public apology. And Acevedo, you need to step down because you are not representing anyone other than those freaks. And why is a mayor speaking on such things as this sort of Homeland Security Council? Why was he appointed to this? That should be state officials. Because what? The city of Austin police are going to go out and be the first line? This is the problem. We're treating this as a law enforcement issue. We've fallen back to the erroneous line of thinking that dominated the American arena of politics throughout the Clinton era. That's what gave us 9/11. It's this trying to think that we can afford them the same type of treatment as a common petty criminal. No, they have declared war on us, and they need to be treated as such. But this Barack Hussein Obama regime is going to do what Fabian socialists always do, and that is deflect, obfuscate, and stick their heads up their posterior, because they have that acute ostrich syndrome. But for J. Johnson, the great and wonderful, to come out and say that right-wing extremists pose just as much of a threat to the country as Islamic extremists, not only is that factually inaccurate, it is blatantly inflammatory in scope and application. And it's interesting because when we look at the actual language from the official meeting minutes, it states, Member Acevedo reminded the council that the threat from right-wing extremists domestically is just as real as the threat from Islamic extremism, the minutes state. No, actually, what's a big as threat, or just as big of a threat as Islamofascism, is allowing Islamofascists into this country without any vetting, claiming that they are refugees. To go along with this Syrian resettlement program that's being foisted on us by the president and not through the proper auspices and channels of government. But even there, we have to wonder what the gutless opposition party would do under Speaker of the House Benedict Arnold Paul Ryan, because he certainly has shown an affinity for just bending over on anything and everything. That cannot work. It does not work. And we find ourselves in this untenable situation, and that's what gave us the bizarre ascendancy of the New York billionaire, businessman, real estate tycoon, and all-around vulgarian Donald Trump, who is also known as John Barron or John Miller. Because the people have been driven to a point of blind rage and fury because of this ridiculous schoolyard bully-like mentality that seems to just be creeping everywhere within the ranks of this twisted and diabolical regime. It would seem that the interests of Islamofascist terrorists are more important than the interests of the American citizen. And again, this is something that my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, and I have bemoaned on prior episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. This whole notion that there's no longer this idea of a national identity in America. That the Fabian socialists have been preaching this hyphenated America through identity politics. You know, it's okay to have pride in your culture and community and where you came from, blah, blah, blah. But your loyalty needs to be to the Constitution, to the United States of America. And what is very frustrating is we have these governmental officials who have taken an oath to uphold, defend, and protect the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic, trying to go after American citizens, equating them to foreign terrorists. Now, I know what their line is going to be. They are going to disingenuously come out and say, well, it did say against domestic enemies as well. But again, show me where, in concrete evidence, that right-wing fundamentalists, as they're putting it, or right-wing extremists, as they're putting it, have carried out these sorts of dastardly attacks. Let's see. Let's just go through some of the ones in the Obama regime. We'll start off with the Fort Hood shooting. Was that a right-wing fundamental? No, that was an Islamo-fascist. Okay, how about the Boston Marathon bombing by the Chechnyan Mario brothers, Zhokhar and Tamerlane Tsarnaev? Oh, wait, they were screaming Allahu Akbar. Of course, that's how our Constitution starts. Isn't that what the language of the preamble to the United States Constitution starts off with, is Allahu Akbar? No, it starts off with we the people. And who is it that these charlatans and these frauds are failing to represent, and whose interests these jackwads are ignoring? Why, that would be the popular sovereigns, we the people. This is an example of how the government is diametrically opposing the will of the American people. And if we look back to the natural law tenets that form the foundation and bedrock principles of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we find that you must have consent of the governed. That is a timeless principle. And it traces its origins back to the field of Runnymede in England in 1215, when the baronage stood up to King John I and said, to hell with you, whining Nelly. You can't just raise taxes without our consent. There is no government without the consent of the governed. And yet our founding fathers stretched that even further, because in England, there is no federalist type of system as we have here in the United States. This tiered system and sovereignty for that centralized system that they have is defined as king and parliament. In the United States, sovereignty rests squarely in the hands of the people, and any power that's exercised by any of the governments, whether it's the governments of the several states or the federal government itself, is derived from the people, because we delegate that authority to them. Guess what delegated authority can do? If you delegate authority, that means you can also take it away. When the government acts in a rogue, tyrannical, illegitimate fashion, and the statements made by Acevedo and Johnson fall into that category, because it is erroneously attempting to equate or to relate or make some connection that's simply not there between the so-called right-wing extremists and Islamo-fascist terrorists. And really, that is the narrative that they're preaching, and it is so frustrating. It shows just how disgusting these people are. And of course, Johnson echoed the sentiment of member Acevedo by saying, according to the minutes, Secretary Johnson agreed and noted that CVE, which is a subcommittee on combating violent extremism, by definition, is not solely focused on one religion. Now, wait a minute. Subcommittee on combating violent extremism. You see, here we go again. The twisted game of semantics. Could you have a more vague or abstract or ambiguous name or agenda? Again, what? Are we going to attack violent extremism of doll collectors? Are we going to attack violent extremism in those who are ham radio operators? What, are they going to go out there and tap out Allahu Akbar and Morse code and then blow up their ham radio set? This is ridiculous, and it shows that they are purposefully, intentionally closing their eyes to the truth and the reality of what's facing us, and that is why Orlando happened. And of course, there are reports out that the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security had no idea what was going on. Oh, they never even fathomed that gay nightclubs could be attacked. Why? Oh, that might be related to the fact that in the Department of Homeland Security, they're disallowed from using words like Sharia or Islamic terrorism, because that might be offensive. Yeah? Might be offensive? How? You know what is offensive? Trying to say that it's right-wing wackos, right-wing extremists. Show me where that has any correlation to what has happened here. Oh, well, a lot of shootings are not related to terrorism or Islamofascism. You're right. You know what they are? They're gang-related. And you know where they happen? In Democrat-controlled cities. So maybe what we need to do is go after this violent extremism in Fabian socialism. We need to go after this incremental attack on our fundamental and inalienable rights, which were endowed to us by our Creator, the God of nature. Ah, but that would be putting the shoe on the other foot. That would actually be holding those governmental officials who all swore an oath to uphold the Constitution accountable. Well, they can't have that happen, because then all of a sudden this could be used against them. No. The narrative has to be that it's these right-wing wackos and they're just as bad as Jihad Johnny. Spare me. Please, spare me. The utter ridiculousness of this all is just beyond the pale. And then we see from the minutes that another council member, Cardinal Point Strategies CEO Paul Goldenberg, joined this charade. The minutes state, Member Goldberg seconded Member Osveto's remarks and noted the importance of online sites in right-wing extremist communities, not only in America, but worldwide. Oh, so now, not only are they going to attack constitutionalists here, they're trying to equate us to foreign nationals. Now, wait a minute. The opening line to the preamble to the United States Constitution states, "We, the people of the United States, have ordained and established this government and this Constitution." And that's the thing. When you look at the true fundamental tenets of federalism, you will find that the way that the federal government is designed to work is to trace its authority back to a power that's specifically enumerated to it within the clear and concise language of the Constitution itself. Now, where is that with respect to the Department of Homeland Security? Where in the Constitution is that ordained and established? Oh, well, if you look at Article 6, Clause 2 of the Supremacy Clause, any law that's made at the federal level is A-OK. Wrong-o. There's a pecking order. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and any laws that are made in pursuance thereof. In other words, any laws that advance the Constitution or operate within the confines of the clear and concise language contained within its four corners. All of a sudden, that changes the narrative. That means that the Constitution itself is the end-all, be-all with respect to being the absolute supreme law of the land. But they're going out of their way to obfuscate that. That's why we have seen constitutional crisis after constitutional crisis ensue in the disastrous 2 terms of this Barack Hussein Obama regime. And it's not about the truth. Basically, what Johnson's doing there is trying to fan his hands out and do a little jig to distract people. And then he's got these little idiots, these lapdogs, that are going right along with it. I've never even heard of Cardinal Point Strategies. What is that? Is that a cardinal point out that we're morons? Because clearly that's what it is. Clearly they are morons. Clearly they do not have one iota or modicum of sense in that skull full of mush. These are Fabian socialist prognosticators. These are the divisive forces that are attempting to tear this country apart at the seams. And they're doing it through balkanization, they're doing it through obfuscation, and they're doing it through mere intellectual disingenuousness. And that's why we have been warning about this time and again ad nauseum here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, because there can be no doubt in our minds that what these people are doing is acting in direct, stark opposition to the consent and the will of the American people. It's as though they want to point to a burning house and to say that, that leaking, that gas leak that was there, that didn't cause it. It was clearly this inflammable roof paneling that it just magically ignited, even though it's fire retardant and fireproof. That's how they think. But do they really believe that? That's where it becomes so difficult to try and wrap our minds around this, because it is not logical whatsoever. It's not realistic. Deep down, they don't believe it. Again, this is as the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs warned us in his magnus opus, Keynes at Harvard, that they will use all sorts of fluff to hide their true intent and agenda. This is part of their original iconography, because if we recall, the Fabian socialists traced their origins back to 19th century Great Britain, and their original iconography was that of a wolf in sheep's clothing. And remember, folks, that was how Scripture described the method in which Satan would infiltrate society. And these fanatic morons, and yes, I am going to call them fanatics, because anyone who tries to equate quote-unquote right-wing extremism to Islamo-fascist terrorism is a whacked-out fundamentalist fanatic. They're Fabian socialist fanatics. But infiltrating society, Satan, incrementally, making himself appear as though he is part of the flock. And remember that their Bible, Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, was dedicated to Lucifer, the fallen angel who is associated with being Satan. Again, if you need any more proof that they shroud themselves in wickedness, in darkness, in sheer evil, you needn't look no further than there, because they're not hiding it in that respect. It's there for those who have a firm grasp of history, for those who have a firm understanding of what this country is about and their own moral identity. That's why they implement the twin doctrines, the twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism. It's so that they can implement their attacks against the decent, hardworking, red-blooded American citizens to divide and conquer. Again, this is what they have always been about. And nothing's going to change that. That has been their modus operandi for the past century and a half. Which is why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence are doing everything in our power to spread the knowledge of the Constitution, because that is the key by which we use to combat them. And remember, folks, that even if this battle is an uphill one, we have truth on our side. But we can't expect to receive instant gratification. We have to be as hard-hearted as they are. We have to be as relentless as they are. And I think we're waking up to that reality as we see that they still try and push the Second Amendment bans, the gun bans, all this nonsense and crap that really has no place in an open and honest society like that of the United States. And of course it comes down to that, because deep down inside, they realize that they cannot compete in the marketplace of ideas. They realize that we will oppose them. But we have to be ever vigilant because they never rest. They never stop. They are cold, calculated, vicious, cold-blooded prognosticators. They are the agent provocateurs of tyranny, despotism, and fanatical government control. There is no other way to describe them. There's no way to candy coat that or sugarcoat that. But the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media are going to do everything within their power to sweep this under the rug. But we're going to shine the light on their intellectual disingenuousness. And folks, don't take what I'm saying here into this microphone at face value. Dig into this yourself. Take a look at it for yourself. Empower yourself. But we do need to come together to stand shoulder to shoulder in stark opposition to this attack on our identity and this lie that they try and say that we're just as bad as ISIS. That's the proof. It's in the official minutes. But are you going to hear that in the mainstream media? Not a chance. That's why we're here, folks. We are going to keep hitting them until the light of truth penetrates this web of deceit that they have woven. Now, folks, continuing along this whole idea of a false dichotomy, a false narrative, a false perception that's being foisted upon us by these nefarious forces that are just ignoring the truth, we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have been appalled by a lot of what's been going on at the Fox News channel. And what was recently stated by Fox News commentator Gretchen Carlson, who has some show over there now, I think it's called Just In with Gretchen Carlson, or whatever her show is called. But after the immediate attack, or, after the immediate aftermath of this attack by Omar Mateen, it was not surprising that Gretchen Carlson came out and basically said that we need to ban assault weapons. It's so bad. They hurt people. We don't know what they might do. And every time we talk about this, there's major problems. And I'm not qualified to speak on any of this. You see, here's the problem. The graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, of whom Gretchen Carlson is firmly a part of, just love obfuscating the truth. They just love lying. They just love taking it away from what it really is. Gretchen, this was an act of terrorism, yet you're buying into the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist line and dicta about it. But folks, I actually have the soundbite here, and I'm going to cue it up so you can hear her just spew this drivel on her own during the program for herself. I will let her be the prognosticator and pontificator of all of that brilliance that resides deep within her mind. And I'm going to cue that up right now. Here we go.
Time now for my take. Every time we have a mass shooting, we talk about guns, right? Yes, the Orlando massacre was terror. But there's no doubt that Omar Mateen was able to kill so many people because he was firing an AR-15. A military-style assault weapon, a weapon easier to buy in the state of Florida than buying a handgun. Florida sets a 3-day waiting period for purchasing handguns, but the state mandates no waiting period for any gun that requires 2 hands to hold. President Obama and gun control advocates have repeatedly called for reinstating the federal ban on semi-automatic assault weapons that expired in 2004. Congress has said no. So what do you think? A recent Quinnipiac poll shows 58% of you support banning the sale of assault-style weapons. So here's my question today. Do we need AR-15s to hunt and kill deer? Do we need them to protect our families? Yes, I'm in favor of people being able to carry. I think some of these mass shootings would have been less deadly if that were the case. But I'm also with the majority today, taking a stand. Can't we hold true the sanctity of the Second Amendment while still having common sense? And that brings us to our question of the day. Should Congress reinstate the assault weapons ban? I know a lot of you aren't agree with me today. That's fine. That's what makes America great. Look, you don't. 89% of you say no. 11% say yes. Tweet me at Gretchen Carlson. Use the hashtag #RealStory. This is why we are America.
No, it's not. We are America because we have the Constitution. Gretchen, to answer your question, which, by the way, is a ridiculous question from its inception, no, we don't do any of that because the Constitution is quite clear. It is very clear what we are supposed to do. The Constitution, in the Second Amendment, makes no bones about it that the right of the people to keep and bear firearms shall not be infringed. So even that 3-day waiting period that you were whining about with respect to handguns is violative of the Constitution. And part of the reason of that fear was that these same frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist types said, well, they can conceal handguns. That makes them more deadly. They fire magic bullets and all of that, and people might die. Yeah, okay, it's great that you support the idea that people should be able to carry and that might have prevented the shooting. But here's the thing. Let's look back to Paris. I'm sure we all remember the Paris terrorist attack. And France has some of the strictest gun control laws in the world. Did that stop the Islamo-fascists from carrying out their attack? No. Let's address another lie there, little Gretchen. He didn't carry an AR-15. This is what I pointed out in the first opening segment of today's Solo Flight special. He carried a Sig Sauer MCX. That's not an AR-15. Again, it's ooh, bad, scary gun. Gretchen Carlson's mind might implode, but that would presuppose that she had a mind to begin with. I never did like her, and I never did like her show. I always thought she was fluff-filled and without substance. Now, I'm quite positive that she is. And should Congress pass a law to violate the Second Amendment? Let's think about that. Pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2 of the United States Constitution, the Constitution itself is the supreme law of the land. Now, of course, she's going to come back and say, but it says laws made in pursuant thereof, except that a law to be made in pursuance of something means to be made advocating it or pursuing the fundamental tenets that are already set out in the clear and concise language contained within its four corners. That's not there. The Second Amendment does not say keep and bear arms shall not be infringed unless it's a military-style assault weapon. It doesn't. And any law that goes against that is violative of the Constitution because the Constitution itself is the supreme law of the land. I don't understand what's so difficult about this, Gretchen. It's not rocket surgery. You don't need Dr. Ben, I'm a victim Carson to figure this out. But you're not about substance. You are just full of yourself, and you say disagreeing is what makes America great? Wrong, wrong, wrong. The Constitution is what makes America great. The fact that we have an open and honest society that is allowed to defend itself because the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty are we the people. Gretchen, you need a remedial course in constitutional doctrine, philosophy, history, and law, because clearly you have no understanding of it whatsoever. And that is why Fox News Channel is suffering in ratings right now. It's because of mindless drivel like that. Just who in the hell is Gretchen Carlson to come out and say that we should curtail our rights? She is a member of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media that simply doesn't know what she's talking about. This whole idea of putting a wait list on a gun that requires two hands to hold is ridiculous. The whole reason that they implemented that wait list for handguns is because it's so easily concealable. You can't so easily conceal a rifle. You can't. And what the hell is an assault weapon? Again, we go back to that thing that we've covered since our first venture out over the friendly airwaves, providing you with the indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment that we do here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that notion of semantics. Here we are, we're playing semantics again. We're using weasel words, we're using those buzzwords, assault weapon, military style assault weapon. Why does that have anything to do with anything? Because it really doesn't. If we look back at the history of the foundation of the United States, if we go back into the turmoil that was there during our struggle for independence, we'll see that the Minutemen, who were known for being crack shots with their Kentucky and Pennsylvania long rifles, had the equivalent of a gun that was superior to the smoothbore muskets carried by the British regulars. Our founding fathers clearly intended for the American people to have the same type of equipment available to the military, available to the people. Why? Because the entire purpose of the people was to establish the government. And the only way they could do it was to defend the fundamental and inalienable right to keep and bear firearms. Remember what sparked the American War of Independence? What really ultimately finally caused blood to be shed was when the British regulars, seeking to control through absolute power, dominance, and tyranny, the colonists, they went to Lexington and Concord to confiscate what? Oh, their militia arms, their military-style, quote-unquote, assault weapons. This is ridiculous. Gretchen, you need to be taken off the air because clearly you don't know what you're talking about. Clearly you are doing a great disservice to the American people and you are trying to deprive us of our fundamental and inalienable rights. Of course, you have a right to say whatever you want to, but that does not mean you have a right to be heard. And I cannot believe that she's still on the show. I can't believe that she has any ratings whatsoever. When she says malarkey like that, what in the hell is going on at the Fox News Channel? Why are they so, dying in the wool to support this type of drivel? What, are they trying to push themselves into irrelevancy? Because that's exactly what they're doing. This sort of nonsense has no place in an open and honest society like the United States of America. And then to address another point that the Gretchter made there, Gretchen, I mean, what is that? Is she one of the monsters from one of the Brothers Grimm type of fairy tales? Oh, I know. She's the witch with Hansel and Gretel. She's the one that wants the gingerbread house. Yes, that's Gretchen. That's Gretchen. She looks like an alligator. But anyway, she said that, well, isn't it because it's so easy to purchase an AR-15, which wasn't even the rifle that he was using, in Florida? Didn't that cause the mass carnage in the nightclub? No. You know what caused the mass carnage in the nightclub? The fact that it was a gun-free zone. The fact that whining little limp-wristed jackrods like you, Gretchy, said, guns and alcohol should never be in the same establishment. Yes, okay, fine. People's judgment is impaired. But if you opened the public ingress, and if there were people in there who were not drinking, and they were denied their right to keep and bear firearms because of a law, that shows you just how destructive it is when we depart from the fundamental tenets, the clear and concise language, the supreme law of the land, our United States Constitution. And so what she's wanting to do is revise the Second Amendment. Of course, she's sitting there saying she supports the Second Amendment right. Okay, so you give them an inch so they take a mile. Yeah, they're not out to grab our guns. They just want to ban certain types. Well, that's grabbing guns. They want to make it so exceedingly difficult to get ammunition for them that it's damn near impossible to own them. Yeah, but that's not banning. That's not infringing the right to keep and bear firearms. Let's see. The right of the people to keep and bear firearms shall not be infringed. I don't understand how this could be so difficult. But then clearly, Gretchen there is a genius. She is a wonderful genius. She is Donald J. Trump-style bigly brains. Except she's not. She is a frothing at the mouth moron. She is a lunatic who is seeking to strip and deprive us of our fundamental and inalienable right, and she is marching down lockstep this narrative that it was an AR-15. No, it was not. If you can't even get the facts straight, you are not qualified to discuss the matter. And to abuse the pulpit that you have there, to spew this nonsense, just further illustrates why the American people are so fed up with the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. In fact, Gretchen Carlson, in that segment right there, is the perfect personification of why we call the mainstream media the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. A bad incident happens, and all of a sudden you've got to ring the little bell, dingy, 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 and there's Gretchen salivating, ready with her pre-prepared talking points of assaulting our fundamental and inalienable right to keep and bear firearms. And you noticed, even in that little clip that I played, she was saying that the vast majority of the people who had answered the poll question disagreed with her. Hey, Gretchen, maybe that's because the viewers, who I have no idea why they're still viewing you, have a better grasp of constitutional law and of the application of the Constitution. If we start encroaching upon the rights of the American people, which, let's face it, folks, we really have already been doing that for a very long time, and now in this once thriving, flourishing, vibrant population of popular sovereigns, this community of popular sovereigns, then we are delegitimizing our government. We are undermining the longest lasting, contiguous, or uninterrupted running constitutional document in the scope of world history. But that doesn't cross Gretchen's mind. Gretchen thinks that we have to keep people safe by banning the badly guns that might hurt people. Oh, that gun is more devastating than anything else. Actually, the 223 round in the AR-15, and we're going to just do this for argument's sake here. We're going to wave a wand to make it to where Gretchen isn't entirely wrong in this hypothetical I'm going to discuss here. The 223 round fired by the AR-15 and the way that the M16, which is the military version or equivalent of the AR-15, was designed for, it's purposefully not to be lethal. It's designed in such a way as to tumble, to, yes, cause grievous injury, but not necessarily to be fatal. Why? Because you tie up more enemies on the battlefield and deplete their fighting capacity by having to have one of the soldiers move the wounded off the battlefield. This incapacitation thus helps shift the power balance in the battlefield. But again, that doesn't cross little Gretchen's mind. And then she is, of course, going along the lines of the Second Amendment about deer hunting. Oh, do we really need it for deer hunting? Let's see. The Second Amendment was put in there for deer hunting. No. This is why the militia clause is in the Second Amendment. It's to explain one of the reasons why the right of the people to keep and bear firearms shall not be infringed. But that, too, doesn't cross Gretchen's mind. Maybe she has reading comprehension trouble. I know that the Constitution's written at a fifth grade level so that any fifth grader could understand it, but apparently Gretchen failed the fifth grade. And yet, she's there on national television with a nationally syndicated show espousing the most ridiculous notions I've ever heard. And that's it, folks. This is what the Fabian socialists do. It's all about spreading this false narrative. It's all about pitting American citizen against American citizen. And believe it or not, folks, this is a prime example of the Cloward and Piven doctrine being put in place. Remember that those two egghead Fabian socialist academicians back in the 1960s devised that doctrine in order to overpower or overwhelm the system, thereby causing the American citizens to crawl on bended knee to the government that created the problem in the first place to magically solve it. That is what's happening here. Gretchen's sitting there whining about guns, saying that guns magically have some matter over mind to control people's actions, that it's as though they have no self-will. And no, it's not Islamofascism. No, it has nothing to do with this jackwad calling 911 and saying, Allahu Akbari, Durka Durka Sherpa Durka Allah. I'm with al-Baghdadi dude. No, his admission, his confession of being motivated by ISIS, and then ISIS taking credibility for it in the immediate aftermath of this attack, that has nothing to do with reality. That has nothing to do with the cause. No, it's the gun. It's the evil firearm. You can't trust no firearm. They do dangerous thingamabobbers. Come on, Gretchen, grow up. The Second Amendment was included in the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, or the Bill of Rights, because they realized that if you deprive the people of the right to keep and bear firearms, you allow tyranny to reign supreme. It's as Machiavelli said in his magnus opus of The Prince, that a prince who disarms his citizens or his subjects dishonors them. So tell me, Gretchen, have you forgotten that one of the central tenets of the foundation of the United States of America was about sacred honor? Was this very notion that they put their lives, their fortunes, but above all, their sacred honor on the line? Or have we really decayed so much as a community, as a culture, and as a society that we don't value honor anymore? Clearly, Gretchen there has no honor. This is disgusting. It shows me that she is a frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist, or if not, then she is a lunatic and a moron at best. And I don't mean that to offend lunatics and morons. But she certainly takes the cake. But she's not alone in this. There's now a constitutional law professor who's saying that we need to just repeal the Second Amendment. All right, bucko, go through Article 5 then. Go through Article 5. That tells you how you amend the Constitution. That's the only way you're going to be able to do it. Because remember how they got rid of that other wonderful Fabian socialist plan of prohibition of alcohol with the 18th Amendment? Yeah, did that stop crime like they said it would? No, it gave birth to organized crime. So they had to amend the Constitution with the 21st Amendment, repealing the 18th Amendment. So that's the only way, legally speaking, that you can repeal the Second Amendment. Oh, and good luck. You're going to have 2/3 of the states vote on it. It ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen. And this is why they try and go around it. This is why they try and use legislation to create so-called assault weapons bans, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? Pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, as I mentioned at the start of this segment, that's violative of the supreme law of the land. It's amazing how that works. It's a safeguard. It's a safety valve to protect the fundamental and inalienable rights of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people. But Gretchen baby, doesn't understand it. Gretchen, it's time to shed your skin. You need a new layer. You're starting to look a little more alligatorish than normal. And leave the discussions for the pressing issues to the adults, because clearly you lack the intellectual fortitude to discuss these things. Clearly, our fundamental and inalienable rights are beyond you. You just don't have the capacity to keep up. And as for that constitutional law professor, go to hell. I'm sick and tired of all of you charlatans, you frauds, you hucksters, you snake oil salesmen trying to strip and deprive the decent, hard-working, red-blooded American citizens of their fundamental and inalienable rights, which were endowed to them by their creator. Oh, and by the way, any law that is designed to deprive people of their fundamental and inalienable right is also violative not only of the supreme law of the land, but also of the Ninth Amendment. Because it should never be interpreted to strip or deprive someone of their rights. Oops. Oops. All of a sudden, little Gretchen is starting to look really afoul of the law here. But again, what have we mentioned over and over again on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer? It's that these charlatans and these hucksters, these Fabian socialists, and their lapdog salivating mainstream media go off of raw emotionalism. Why? Because it's so easy to manipulate people there. And she said she didn't care if people disagreed with her. Hey, Gretchen, looking at the staggering amount of people that disagreed with you, only 11% of your viewing audience, which is dwindling, I'm sure, agreed with you. That tells you that maybe you need to reevaluate the position you're taking. But you're not going to do that because that's, so difficult. And Gretchen, you're so brilliant that you know everything offhand already, right? Yeah. Your credibility, if you even had any, is shot. And you're part of the reason why the Fox News channel is sinking. That and their just bizarre love fest with the quaff waffler. It makes no sense. The true problem here, aside from divorcing ourselves from the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution, is Islamofascist terrorism. They are just as fanatical as the Japanese were in World War II. They are just as dedicated to our death and annihilation as our enemies were in the Second World War, and as any enemy that has ever stood against the fundamental tenets of our representative Republican form of government. But there has always been the old adage that America would only tear itself apart from within. The only way that our fundamental and inalienable rights could ever be stripped from us is if we allowed these nefarious forces who are infiltrating us from within. Remember that the Fabian socialist original iconography was that of a wolf in sheep's clothing, managed to convince us to hand over our rights on a silver platter. And so what Gretchen is trying to create there, what she is pushing for, is a tyranny. She may not think it's a tyranny, but the media is oftentimes referred to as the Fourth Estate. Why do we have the protection of a free, independent media in the First Amendment? It's because they're supposed to defend our liberties, but she's doing the exact opposite. She is proving that she is a wide-eyed moron. The Second Amendment's not about deer hunting, again. When they were sounding the alarm for Lexington and Concord, it wasn't to say, look out, the deer are coming, or the British regulars are here to take away your ability to hunt deer. No, it was the regulars are coming to infringe upon your fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. Funny how that works. Funny how Gretchen just doesn't seem to understand that. Gretchen, seriously. you need help. You need help badly. And maybe that means a sabbatical or going away. Maybe it means peeling that alligator skin of yours. I'm not sure what it's going to take, but what you did there on that program strips you of any and all credibility. It shows that you are taking a position that is diametrically opposed to the rights of the people, and you're not addressing the terrorism problem. You used a yeah, but. Give me a break. Terrorism, but clearly it was the gun. No, wrong. If we're going to combat terrorists, we have to be armed. And that means with every firearm, class, style, and availability. That's not radical. That's not fundamentalist. That's not twisted. That's the God's honest truth. I'm sorry, Gretchen, that this is just a little above your head, but we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, are about preserving the rights of the people. And we'll call out anybody who attempts to encroach upon, belittle, or step upon the fundamental and inalienable rights of the popular sovereigns. We are dedicated to that. We do this show to empower the American people, and that's why we point out things like Gretchen's little mistake there. And it's not a mistake. It's her stupidity, because there really is no other term for it. And with that said, folks, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back with one last round of alcohol. I guarantee you, folks, she will not attempt to lie to you or take away your fundamental and inalienable rights. She'll just pour you a glass of alcohol. As always, folks, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Please feel free to leave any questions, comments, or concerns you may have either here on our YouTube page or on our Google Plus page or our Facebook page. And on top of that, also feel free to follow us on Twitter with the Twitter handle at Radio Aviation EX. One more time, folks, that's at Radio Aviation EX. And there you'll find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, our Blogspot page, which lists audio blogs, and our Cafe Press account that has all sorts of trinkets and goodies with our logo on it and our first class passengers logo on it at reasonable prices. And that includes drinking glasses, hats, apparel for dogs, iPhone, iPad, Android phone, Android pad, covers, protectors, tote bags, you name it, it's there. Show your support of the Constitution with us here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. Thank you again, folks. We will see you next time. Do take